There is more than 400 years between them, yet there is no doubt Malorie Blackman had Shakespeare's classic love story, Romeo and Juliet, in mind when she wrote her teen smash hit, Noughts and Crosses. During an interview with Laura Atkins, a self-styled children's literature specialist, she talked about her early plans for Noughts and Crosses, saying that she knew it was going to be a Romeo and Juliet friendship that turns into a love story between Seffi and Callum. The similarities are marked. Yet, what does a detailed comparison of the two relationships of Romeo and Juliet in Shakespeare and Callum and Seffi in Noughts and Crosses reveal about how the priorities of writers have evolved and how people and societies have changed over the centuries? Stay tuned. You're watching Schofield on Shakespeare. Both sets of heroes are very similar ages. In chapter 1 of Noughts and Crosses, yes, the chapter with Callum and Seffi's first kiss described in its toe-curling detail, we find out that Callum is 15 and a half, while Seffi is a little younger at 14 in 3 weeks. In Act 1, Scene 2 of Romeo and Juliet, Juliet's father, Capulet, reveals that his daughter is, like Seffi, 13. She has not seen the change of 14 years. We do not find out Romeo's exact age. In general, plays often leave details about ages and physical characteristics to the discretion of directors, unlike novels where narrators have greater scope for description. But in the absence of information to the contrary, one would presume him to be of a similar age to Juliet, though like Callum, to be slightly older. However, although our two heroes may be of similar ages, their first lengthy encounters in the text could not be more different. Callum and Seffi meet on Seffi's private beach, an Ivana consisting of kilometres of coastline that was all ours. They have been inseparable friends all their lives, and the aforementioned kiss takes place after a polite request from Callum. Blackman recounts the minutiae of the kiss in tiny, excruciating comic detail. Both have never kissed romantically before, and Seffi's questions are frequently hilariously matter-of-fact and totally unromantic. She impatiently asks Callum to clarify her head position for the kiss that is seconds away. Do you want me to tilt my head to the left or the right? A helpful question for a dentist perhaps, but surely an immediate passion killer within a romantic context. Further comedy is shown when Callum licks his lips before moving in, causing Seffi to cry, "Oh no you don't, wipe your lips first." Blackman is clearly aiming to highlight, in a light-hearted, humorous way, the awkwardness of teenagers falling in love with each other, experimenting with their youthful sexuality, and in doing so shows an awareness of their target teenage audience's interests and concerns. Of course, there is some exaggeration shown in Seffi's pedantic questioning. Surely no 21st century teenager would be quite so naive or finicky about a kiss, given the ever-increasing sexualisation pervading our society via advertising, pop music, TV shows and especially the internet. Yet it does show Blackman deliberately moving away from stereotypical, cliched views of romantic love, in which lovers move seamlessly, elegantly and beautifully through the various stages of courtship into happy ever afters and golden sunsets. Callum and Seffi meet on the latter's private beach, and certainly Romeo and Juliet's first meeting takes place in surroundings that likewise indicate wealth. It is Act 1, Scene 5, and Romeo has smuggled his way into an ancient feast attended by all the admired beauties of Verona. So whereas our first proper introduction to Callum and Seffi sees the two of them alone, Romeo and Juliet are first seen together at a high society dance and dinner, attended by the wealthiest, most respectable men and women from the entire town. And whilst Callum and Seffi may have been friends from a very young age and know each other inside and out, Romeo and Juliet clasp eyes on each other for the first time at this grand gathering and are instantly smitten. Because Callum knows Seffi so well, he can ask directly for a kiss, which he does in the gloriously straightforward and short question, "Can I kiss you?" Romeo is a similar young man to Callum in that he too has developing sexual desires and feelings, but he has never met Juliet before and doesn't realise she is from a family which has been involved in a bitter dispute with his own for some time. He needs to take a more subtle, poetic approach. His language is almost the opposite to Callum's, as shown when he begins his seduction attempt. In Baz Luhrmann's 1996 production of the play, Romeo is played by Leonardo DiCaprio. Let's see him weaving his magic. Forget the ludicrous outfits for the moment. It is a fancy dress party on Juliet, played by Claire Danes.
My lips, two blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss.
Romeo uses a sophisticated metaphor to describe his lips as pilgrims, travellers to a special place for religious purposes. The inference is that Juliet is almost holy in her beauty, and that Romeo would potentially be prepared to travel vast distances, just as a Christian would, visiting a holy site in a far-off land, to show his devotion towards her. This is wonderful, sophisticated flattery, and it is not surprising that it quickly reaps the intended reward. Just 10 lines later, Juliet indeed puckers up. Yet unlike Callum and Seffi's kiss, it is spontaneous and relished immediately by both sides, even though, like Blackman's young teenagers, it is almost certainly their first ever romantic kiss. In between kisses, the pair continue to spout poetic lines at each other, lines spoken in identical iambic pentameter meter, lines of poetry that contain 10 syllables with every second syllable stressed, before Juliet confirms her utter delight at Romeo's kissing technique.
You kiss by the book.
The expression is still used nowadays and suggests that even with virtually no kissing experience, Romeo is already a confirmed expert in the arts. Now, there is no doubt that language evolves with time and that Shakespeare's English would have been slightly different to today's version of the same language. However, people would not have spoken spontaneously using such an artificial, fixed meter, and youngsters would not have been sensational kisses without any practice at all. So it is clear that in Romeo and Juliet, and indeed all of his plays, Shakespeare is not intending to paint a totally realistic representation of the world in which he lived. Instead, he wanted to explore ideas through drama, experiment with the full, rich tapestry of language, which is generally chronically underused within everyday, ordinary, and arguably boring to listen to on stage speech. Moreover, whereas Noughts and Crosses is aimed firmly at teenagers, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet was aimed at adult theatre-goers from various walks of life, keen for some dramatic entertainment. Would they have felt inclined to part with their hard-earned wage to listen to two naive, innocent teenagers talking slowly to each other, using simple words of generally one syllable, and less than inspiring dialogue such as, "What you thinking?" "Nothing." Following their first kiss on the beach, Callum and Seffi chat about an exciting development in the former's life. He has just won a place at Seffi's school. Even though Seffi is more than a year younger, she has been helping him with his schoolwork, which directly resulted in him passing the entrance examination. Blackman slowly reveals details of a society which is riddled with a huge dividing line between two groups of people. Callum argues that he is a year behind at school because, until a few years ago, we were only allowed to be educated up to the age of 14, and in Noughts-only schools at that, which don't have a quarter of the money or resources that your schools have. Callum is from a group of people known as Noughts, whereas Seffi is from the group known as Crosses, and it is clear Callum in particular feels bitterness over the divisions between these groups. Urging Seffi to think beyond her own limited current situation and setup in life, he declares that there's more to life than just us Noughts and you Crosses. The use of the pronouns us and you introduce firm barriers and differences between two young people who have, to Seffi's initial concern, just shared their spit in a moment of experimental intimacy. Seffi picks up on Callum's wording, begs him not to speak in that way, saying that it makes it sound like you're in one place and I'm in another, with a huge great wall between us. Callum does not disagree with this analysis of his language, and as the novel continues it becomes clear that the differences in status of noughts and crosses are vast, are so insurmountable, that in fact a future relationship between them would be completely impossible, resulting in the unmitigatingly bleak ending and Callum's death. As a nought, Sephi is extraordinarily wealthy, as well as owning a private beach. Her parents' country house, the adjective country implying the existence of another house elsewhere in the city, has 7 bedrooms and 5 reception rooms for 4 people. However, as a cross, Callum is unquestionably poor, and after waking one morning, he despairs at the sight of the shack that was meant to be my home. Shacks are very simple, small buildings, often run down and falling to pieces, and Callum feels this noun is more appropriate to describe the place he lives, rather than the warmth and notion of family implied in the word home. Moreover, Blackman is keen to stress that these vast differences in wealth and situations are not just experienced by Callum and Sephi, but by all other noughts and crosses too. Callum rebels inwardly against the unfairness of the society in which he lives. Why couldn't my family live in a house like Sephi's? Why didn't any nought I knew of live in a house like Sephi's? So in Noughts and Crosses, institutional, society-wide barriers ultimately prevent 2 young people coming together who happen to be called Callum and Sephi. In a different way, it is a petty family feud that results in Romeo and Juliet's short-lived relationship coming to a tragic end. For in Shakespeare's play, Romeo and Juliet are not from radically different backgrounds or from 2 groups of people deliberately set apart from each other by law and prejudice. Their families are both respectable, wealthy and of good repute. At the end of Act 1, Scene 5, Juliet's nurse hints about her family's wealth and tells Romeo that he that can lay hold of Juliet shall have the chinks. So in other words, the man that can obtain Juliet's hand in marriage shall end up with plenty of cash. But just as Callum is not interested in a relationship with Sephi just for her money, in spite of his poverty, so Romeo is likewise disinterested in any financial, social climbing aspect. He too is from a respectable, noble family. When Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, rages about Romeo coming in uninvited to their party, Capulet argues that Romeo bears him like a portly gentleman, and to say truth, Verona brags of him to be a virtuous and well-governed youth. So Romeo is so dignified that the whole Italian town of Verona where they live figuratively boasts about his virtue, his self-discipline, his nobility. There are no institutionalised barriers between Romeo and Juliet's family in the play, just a petty feud which has arisen from an airy word, some entirely trivial comments, and has resulted in 3 civil brawls, some shocking fights in the streets. Thus, when Romeo and Juliet's relationship tragically results in their death, it is far easier for the society in which they live to come to terms with what has happened. Although, of course, the pair cannot be brought back to life, the families can reflect on the utter pointlessness of being at savage loggerheads over nothing, and at the end of the play, the 2 previously warring fathers come together as friends. Capulet symbolically asks Brother Montague, "Give me thy hands," and in doing so unites the 2 families that have been broken apart by the deaths of their young.